Hello, good evening. Hope everyone had a great day today. We wanted to come on tonight and do a little bit of a chat about GNM, nutrition, and cancer, and just diets in general. I posted something yesterday, and it was basically a picture, an image talking about the increasing rates of cancer, how many more people each year get diagnosed with cancer. And the image that I took from somewhere else said, let's start with what's on your plate. And I altered it to say, let's start with your thoughts. And one of my reasons for that is just kind of the idea that I thought was really interesting to think about just the number of meals you eat per day. One maximum, probably 5 meals if you include snacks and stuff, 1 to 5 meals per day.
7 to 10.
But how many thoughts do you think in a day? What, between somewhere, I don't know who estimated this. This is just the number we go off of. Somewhere between 50,000 and 70,000 thoughts every single day. And then when you know the major premise of GNM, which is that cancer is not an error of the body, it's actually a biological program, and it's initiated by a shocking trauma. Something happens to you that catches you off guard in a split second, and your body, in response to it, adapts your tissues. And so depending on the type of shock, either there's tissue loss or there's tissue proliferation, depending on the nature of the conflict itself. And so the formation of cancer, from the German medicine perspective, is that it's not an error. It's not a screw up of your immune system or of your genes. It's purposeful. It's got a specific reason that it's there for your survival. And so when it comes to most people, a lot of people, especially in the natural health world, once you kind of I would say, once you have said, okay, I'm not going to go the traditional kind of chemoradiation route, I want to heal my body naturally, typically the first thing that people recommend is kind of a major nutrition overhaul. We've got to cut this food out, we've got to add in these foods, and nutrition seems to be the major focus. And I know that because that's what one of the major things I used to teach. I used to think that nutrition was like the number one most important, have to change immediately. You've got to cut out all sugar, you really should cut out all of these foods, you need to add in all of these foods.
And it doesn't, I remember at that time, I experienced this too, it didn't matter what your experience was. It wasn't really important that you feel good about cutting those things out. The really relevant thing for us at the time, and I guess it's quite kind of materialistic in a way, narrow in focus. The important thing was that you eat this, not that. That was the essential outcome. And if you didn't like it, well, it was kind of just like, well, tough shit. I'm thinking as long as you're eating that kale, everything will be fine. And that I think is one of the big shifts now, because the healthy eating is still kind of a part of our lives.
Absolutely.
But there's an awareness of the fact that it's not. Hey Cheryl, there's an awareness of the fact that it's not irrelevant how you feel about it. It's not irrelevant what your experience of shifting to your eating is. And if you're feeling really deprived, or if you're feeling attacked, or if you're feeling coerced, or if you're feeling kind of lorded over, or if you're feeling like some comfort is being taken from you or something like that, that's really important too. If you feel like you're doing it because you have to, or because you should, or because you're never going to be happy again, or whatever, those things are really important too. And I think that's the critical shift, because I can remember for us, we didn't overtly say, it's like, with the whole thing about choosing consciously, we didn't like say to each other, oh, it doesn't matter how people feel as long as they change. We literally never even talked about it. In fact, the only interest that we had in how people felt about changing their diet in the way that we thought they needed to was, can we get them to feel some way, usually feel so bad about what they're eating now that they will be pushed by negative emotion toward modifying their behavior. And so it was actually the opposite. It was actually, our whole strategy was to talk about how poisonous and awful and terrible all this stuff was that the people were eating, so that they would comply behaviorally with what we wanted to do. And it was kind of like, to hell with their experience. We're trying to save their life. Who cares how they feel about it? You must eat this, not that. And I think that's that powerful shift that's really occurred for us, right?
Yeah, it's very powerful, and it's extremely nuanced too, because if you don't really pay attention to what's being said, you can kind of lump it into, I'm saying that nutrition doesn't matter anymore now that I know GNM. And that's one of the things that I do want to be very clear, that I do think quality nutrition is extremely important. It's very important while your body is healing, especially from certain types of cancers require protein during the healing phase. It's absolutely necessary and I think that you should have good quality protein and grass-fed meats and free range and organic. I do think that is extremely important. But the thing is when it comes to primacy over the cancer experience, the growth of cancer or the healing of cancer depends upon your state of being. Am I in a fight or flight mode? Am I stressed? Am I worried? Am I feeling not okay? Am I doubting myself? Am I feeling like I'm letting my family down? Those feelings drive the adaptation phase. Feeling good, feeling relaxed, feeling at ease, feeling, celebration, joy, all of that. That's the healing phase, and that allows your body to do whatever it needs to do, whether it's growing a tumor as a healing phase or breaking down a tumor as a healing phase. The body is doing the correct thing. Your state of mind, though, your peace of mind, your ease, your well-being, that is the primary factor. And like you said, with how the person feels about what they're eating, this I find it's so important, because when a person has a cancer diagnosis, and let's say that person has typically a bad diet, let's say a parent, and this is actually kind of a weird experience that I had for a long time, is my parents don't eat the way I would like them to eat. And many years I would tell them that they needed to change their diet, and I experienced their diet as a cancer causing diet. And in a sense, I feel like I was almost waiting, oh, it's almost inevitable. I felt that my parents would develop cancer someday based on the crap that they ate. That was my experience.
It was a prediction that was often vocalized, right?
Isn't that terrible? Yeah, and I would say stuff like that to them. Like, if you keep eating that stuff, you're going to get cancer.
Well, and the reason for that too, though, was because your primary goal was a change in behavior. You're eating this. I don't want you to eat that. You need to eat this instead. And you were willing, because that was the primary goal, right? You were you were willing to do anything you needed to do to get them up to and including literally throwing things away in their house, like physically removing items from their house, which unfortunately doesn't work too well, because the grocery store's right around the corner. They go get some more and put it back as soon as you leave, right? So you were willing to create within them any state, or attempt to create within them any state, including a negative state, if you thought that doing that would somehow or another, if I could get them to feel intensely bad enough about what they're doing and about what the results will be, maybe that will create a substantive and a sustainable change in their dietary behavior. And that's the really essential thing. So it's funny how that was
so funny. And I think of it now, how I would have experienced, say, if my dad got cancer. How I would have experienced that is it would have been a big I told you so moment, and okay, well, let me get into your kitchen moment, and now you have to listen to me moment. You know what I mean? And during his process of healing, what would happen? I would have deprived him greatly of all of these things that he likes to eat. And that deprivation, a very common secondary cancer, what gets considered a metastasis. In German New Medicine, there is no metastasis. There is very little medical evidence that cancer actually moves from one location to another. It's that there are additional conflict shocks, and a common cancer diagnosis conflict shock that you get at that point is a starvation conflict. And a starvation conflict will cause tumors in the liver to grow. And so when people are feeling deprived, when you've taken all of the sugar out of their diet, even though they've had eaten sugar every day for forever, or something that they enjoy, some kind of thing that brings them some type of pleasure, and lets them know that they're okay, you take away all of those foods because you are convinced that food is fueling their cancer. I mean, that's how I experienced sugar. That's how I taught people that you need to consider sugar like putting gasoline on a fire when it comes to your cancer. And the really damaging thing I think about that thought process, again, it was that you've got to feel so bad that hopefully you won't do this really bad thing that's so bad for your health when they did do it. Because inevitably there'd be a birthday party, there'd be a celebration, there'd be something, and they just want to feel normal, and they just want to, have a good time and relax. And I even see in a lot of the kind of cancer natural healing groups I'm in, someone's like, oh my goodness, I broke my diet and I really feel awful, like, please help me emotionally now, because
and there's like a stress associated with that. And I think one of those things is for me, it just continually comes back to the relevance of that we experience ourselves as sort of like heads in a jar sometimes, or as very human beings, or we experience ourselves as I. And I think that that's relevant, that's legitimate. But we're also an organism, in this earthly plane, and this whatever, what I'm saying? Like, we are animals in a sense, we are organisms. And when you consistently kind of make bridges between, okay, I'm experiencing myself as a human being, it's like, gosh, I'd really like to go to get a hamburger, or ooh, I'd really like to eat some ice cream, or my favorite thing, or whatever, that experience of deprivation, or whatever it is that you're having, that it has a biological significance, it is biologically relevant. Because it's easy to, if I'm just Steve who wants to eat a cookie or a donut, which was mentioned earlier, I think, then it's easy for me to overlook what the biological significance of that is. Like, if the me that I am experiencing myself to be is feeling like he'd really like to eat item X, whatever that is, what is, and I'm in this state of like protracted sort of misery, or protracted deprivation, or protracted guilt. Let's say I eat it and then I feel really guilty about it, or whatever. What's the biological significance to that? Because I wouldn't be having an experience if that experience weren't biologically relevant, which is to say, if that experience weren't communicating something relevant to the tissues of my body. If my experience was not in some way going to be responded to by my body, why would me as an organism, why would I have the ability to have that experience in the first place? And I think getting used to kind of understanding what it's like to be you, your feelings, your emotions, your experience, whatever you're doing, in terms of what's the biological relevance of this, because it's so easy to get so fixated on the behavioral outcome. Well, what really matters is what I do and what I don't do. And those things may be important, but it's also hugely important what your experience is, because your experience is communicating a lot of stuff to your body. And your body is, literally, your body is in constant rapport with your experience, even if you are not. Even if you are not aware of how you're feeling, your body is, and your body is responding to it. Your body is inferring things about the world around you, and it's inferring things about what is necessary in terms of adaptation, in terms of preparation to maximize the probability of your survival as an organism. And the thing that it infers from, the thing that informs the tissues of the body inside about what's going on in the outside, and what those tissues can do to maximally promote survival. It's your experience, it's your feeling, it's what you're seeing, how you're seeing it. You're feeling deprived, you're feeling threatened, you're feeling dangerous, you're feeling in danger, you're feeling frustrated, you're feeling, whatever. And I think that distinction between kind of active and passive disease is such a useful thing. It's like you even mentioned the whole idea of fire, throwing fuel in the fire. And that's how I think a lot of people, that's the conventional, and even the alternative view of cancer, is that your body's a house, and cancer is this foreign force, right, that takes root in the house and grows and engulfs the whole thing. But it's like a foreign agent. It's like a force of nature that's sort of ravaging the structure of your body that's really important to you. And the German New Medicine perspective and take on cancer is not necessarily, oh, it's a great thing you have cancer because your body's doing it on purpose. That's not necessarily it. It's that the cancer isn't happening because something's gone wrong in your DNA, or because something's gone wrong in your diet. The cancer is happening because your body thinks that, based on your experience, based on its interpretation of your experience, on your perception, it thinks that that's going to do something to help you in surviving, right? And so it's deliberately doing those things in response to its interpretation of what your experience is. So the problem in that case is not that the cancer is able to happen, right? So the solution to that, from that perspective, is not to go in and do things to prevent that biological process from happening. The solution to that is to identify why that biological process is occurring, which is to say, what about my experience is communicating to my tissues that this is a really good idea? Because from my perspective, it's not a good idea. I don't know what's going on here. Why does my body seem to be under the impression that this is going to help? right? To what experience is this particular manifestation of my body's adaptive ability a response? And when you begin to think of it in those terms, you recognize that it's not that bad food is causing this thing to happen. This is a thing that your body is doing. It's not a thing that's happening to your body. It's a thing your body's doing. Well, why is your body doing that? Well, then you begin to look at your experience and you begin to understand. Like, when you think about cancer as or any of these active diseases as an adaptive response, you begin to say, okay, to what is this meant to be an adaptation, right? What are the tissues of my body inferring about my environment on the basis of what my experience is communicating to those tissues that makes my body think, not think obviously, but makes my body, the wisdom or the code in my body determine that this kind of cellular proliferation is a good idea, a viable sort of adaptive response. And when you think of it that way, again, you're not necessarily excited that it's happening, but it changes the dynamic a whole lot. It's kind of like a situation where, let's say you're roommates with someone, and this person is consistently doing things that are causing you a lot of upset, a lot of upheaval. They're causing you a lot of trouble. Let's say they're throwing away food that's really important to you, right? So this isn't like the nutrition talk. This is just a totally different analogy. So you're with a roommate, and your roommate is doing something that was not helping you. They're causing you a lot of problems. Now, if you think that there's something wrong with the roommate, well, then you're gonna start thinking, okay, this person's, they're out to get me. They're evil. There's something fundamentally defective with them. They don't know how to interact with other human beings. There's something wrong with that person. That's why they're doing that. That's how a lot of people relate to their body. There's something defective. It's out to get me. There's something wrong with it. I've done something wrong, and therefore now they're kind of getting back at me or something like that. On the other hand, though, if you think about it in terms of communication, you could ask yourself a question like, why does that person think it's a good idea? Maybe when they were growing up in their household, if the bananas turned all the way yellow, they were bad and rotten and they were thrown out. Well, that's how it happened. Well, like a lot
Brown?
of people. Well,
Yellow?
I'm saying, like, you're there, you're waiting for them to ripen.
Oh.
Right? And you don't eat them until they are yellow. We've got deep into the weeds here. But in their house, they ate unripe bananas. Because some people do that. I do that sometimes. And by the time it gets yellow, they think it's bad. Or avocados. I don't know. Whatever. Yeah. The point is, they're throwing away your food, and you don't know why. And you can either decide that there's something wrong with them and that they're out to get you, or that, it's just a bad situation, or what makes them think this is a good idea? And I think that's that thing too, when you kind of, in a sense, you're kind of roommates with your body. Do you know what I mean? Like, you guys got to get along. And to the degree that you can learn to communicate effectively with your body, it's the same as with relationships. It's the same as with you in reality. It's the same as with everything. When you're, and this is a hard thing to do sometimes. Especially, it doesn't get more close to home, you know what I'm saying, than your physical body, your apparatus here. And so if it's doing something that's causing the you that you experience yourself to be, the I, the ego, the whatever, physical pain, or causing you to fear for your existence, and you've got that anxiety of surviving or not, it can be very difficult to kind of keep a resourceful mindset about, well, wait a minute though, every behavior, every activity, every response makes sense in the full context of what's happening, so I'm not going to allow the fact that my body seems to be doing something that's totally ruining my life to cause me to turn my back on my body, or to write my body off, or just to say, well, F that guy, we're going to force him into submission. I'm going to, no matter how hard it is, I'm going to attempt to reestablish communication. I'm going to look at this thing and understand whatever's going on right now as kind of a breakdown in communication, and see if I can reestablish rapport. Let me understand why this thing is doing what it's doing, because if I can understand why it's doing that, I may be able to elicit from it the changes that I would really like to see. And when you start thinking in that way, it's a very empowering thing, and it's a whole lot. You stop thinking in terms of, I'm going to make it impossible for my body to do this, which is like, let's cut off the sugar so that the cancer can't grow. It then becomes a matter of, I'm going to make it so that my body doesn't think this is the thing to do anymore. I'm going to communicate something differently, and I think that one of those things is coming to realize that the physical body that you are inhabiting right now is it's the way that it is in response to communications that it's been receiving from your experience up into this moment in time. That's the German medicine idea, the perspective there, and that then places you in a position of immense responsibility now. And by responsibility, I mean power, because you then get to decide consciously, okay, henceforth, moving forward, what the body that I occupy 6 months, 9 months, a year from now is going to be a body that is built in response to the experience, the communication that I give by way of my experience beginning right now. And when you think in those terms, you start really kind of cultivating an experience that constitutes the kind of communication you want to be sending to your body.
Yeah, any decisions that you make regarding whatever changes you're going to embark upon after a diagnosis, or after even just symptoms that you have that you're like, oh, I feel like there's something I can do to change this. If you are making those decisions from a place of fear, from a place of this is bad, I need to get away from this bad thing, that is not going to be a good decision. Any decision made from a place of fear. And that's why I love G&M so much, is because when you understand, when you have this rapport, when you understand this ancient roommate that you're communicating with that has a very rudimentary language.
It was there first.
It was there first. Like, your body is ancient, your body is old, your body has so much wisdom in it, and it responds in an on-off kind of way. It says, oh, is there a problem? Is there something we need to do? It is at your beck and call. It is there to serve you. It is there to keep you alive. And anytime there's a little something that it thinks, okay, I can do something, I can step in here, I can help out, it's really interesting. Like, a food example that we had for a very long time was like bad oils, and we just could not eat at any restaurant that cooked with any kind of soybean oil or canola oil or anything, because we would both get a breakout. We'd get like acne afterwards, and he would get it and I would get it, and we just determined it was this thing that was causing it. But then when I learned about how acne is a result of a feeling soiled or feeling attacked conflict, and I realized that I had the notion of feeling soiled after eating this bad oil every time I ate it, I created that. I created this experience of, oh no, I'm going to have a breakout because I ate this bad oil. And now, I mean, we don't eat out often.
Well, I think that the key thing there is that it's not that it was a psychosomatic thing in the sense that, like, you expected a breakout so you got it. Mm-hmm. It so happens that the experience associated with eating bad food created in you I feel soiled. And it so happened that the biological program that's associated with that feeling soiled manifests as the acne. So it's not that you expected acne so you got it.
Right.
It's that because you were worried about the acne, you did something that you thought caused that, you then felt soiled, and it was that feeling or that experience of being soiled that then gave rise to it. So I think it's kind of an interesting kind of happening thing, because it's not like, well, if I fear cancer, I'm necessarily going to create cancer, right?
That's a very interesting nuance too, because that I used to think that too. Oh, it's just like an energy, and you think about cancer a lot, and then you're gonna develop cancer, and it really doesn't work that way. It is about a moment where you're like it, and it could be very subtle. It could be a huge, extreme, obvious trauma. And I think when we use the word trauma or we use the word conflict shock, that's kind of what comes to mind is a car accident, something like absolutely over the top, horrible happening. But it's little things too. It's little, caught off guard. Didn't. That just, in that moment, I was like, oh, this stinks. Like, really, really quick comments made from other people, things that you end up having to do that you didn't think you have to do, messes you've got to clean up. You know what I mean? Like how quickly these little conflicts can take place all throughout our day. And when
it's a little jump over the threshold. So you've got this emotional threshold, and the emotional threshold is the point beyond which you cease to let things be okay. It's the point at which you start to resist emotionally. It's the point at which you begin to suffer. And I'm going along here. Oh, someone left something there. Oh, someone cut me off in traffic. I'm running late to this thing. And you go up and over. You know what I'm saying? Even just for a second. And I think that I think that you either go over the threshold or you don't. So you either have the conflict or you don't. But the thing is how far above the threshold you go and how long you stay there. Those are important things. And so I think the idea is there, if you go over the threshold, there is a tissue response. There is a conflict. There is a response. It can be so insignificant, though, that it never even registers for you, that you would never even know, because you have a conflict and then it resolves so quickly, no one even knows the difference. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's analogous to, like, if you brush up against something and you get a little cut or an abrasion, but you don't even know it's there, and it just heals. I think it's probably similar to that. But then there are other things where the intensity, the duration, you go over your threshold either high enough, or you go slightly over your threshold and you linger there long enough, kind of a slow burn sort of thing, where the tissue adaptations, the special program that is initiated, creates enough of an alteration in some tissue somewhere in your body that the repair process that begins when that program is over, when the conflict is done, the repair process, there's enough swelling, there's enough, stuff that you feel some pain, that you feel a little something going on. Mm-hmm. And so, I think that there's probably some nuance to that, but when it comes to those conflicts, it is an isolated moment in time. And it's an instantaneous thing. And it doesn't really matter whether or not it was reasonable to be conflicted. It doesn't really matter if other people would understand why you were conflicted. It doesn't really matter if in retrospect it makes sense to you why it was a conflict. It's really your experience in that moment in time. Things that you just simply imagine can be the source of conflict. Things that you thought were true when they really weren't can be a source of conflict. I mean, one of the things I was kind of writing about today is this idea that a person could endure the loss of a loved one, the loss of a pet, the loss of a job, something that most people would expect would cause a conflict. They could go through that, no problem whatsoever. And then something very minor, like being cut off in traffic, or, a neighbor, letting their dog poop in their yard or something like that, that then could cause something for them. It really is such an individual thing, and there's so many factors, I think, that go into how close are you to threshold already? Is this a sore spot? Has stuff like this happened before? There's just so many different things that are totally unique to you, and that's where I think the value of paying attention to what your experience is. Because, you probably relate to this. Have you ever felt intensely, say, some negative emotion about something, and you've got two different, there's a part of you that kind of like decides what's true, and there's a part of you that looks at how intensely negative you felt about this thing, and then there's a part of you that says, is it reasonable to feel the way I'm feeling? And if it's not really reasonable, that almost wins out, and it's like the fact that I'm feeling that way doesn't really matter because I talked to my friend and they said it's not a big deal. It's like, well, your experience is a big deal because your body's not responding to what's true. Your body's responding to your experience of what's true. And, when you recognize that, you begin to recognize that, maybe your experience isn't telling you what to do. Maybe, if someone does something that really makes you angry, that anger isn't saying it's time to go over there and beat them up. But your body is responding to that anger. It's not responding to the reality that they were just in a hurry and they didn't mean you any harm. Your body is responding to your experience. And so finding, I think, ways to really pay attention to that experience and then by degrees to learn how to modify it and actually kind of bulletproof it against that kind of thing moving forward is a good thing.
Yeah, that kind of bulletproofing. Cheryl had a question here. So our goal is never to be caught off guard. Is it, so then we're always on guard and expecting something to happen? Not exactly. It really is more to do with awareness of your state, elevating your emotional threshold for what you can handle, because that's the thing, is you don't want to go around in fear of a conflict shock, because what is that? That's another conflict shock. That's it's trusting yourself. It's trusting yourself with all eventualities of knowing that, I know that unexpected things can happen. It's life. That is just the nature of things. Everything is constantly changing at every single moment. And so you can't really protect yourself against all things that could happen and really be on guard all the time so you don't get caught off guard. It's really about building this apparatus within yourself for recognition, for awareness, knowing when, if a conflict does happen, recognizing it right away, having that ability to emotionally resolve it, realize that you went over a threshold. And that's really the whole process of knowing yourself, of awareness, of becoming kind of anti-fragile, where if something does happen, you know that you're going to respond resourcefully to it, and that there's always going to be a good way that you can respond to this and improve your life and still get the things that you want. It's just that it's more of a lifestyle. That's really, we are working on a really great thing that we're going to be launching very soon, which is like a whole hub of information that you can go to create a conflict resolution lifestyle where you become anti-fragile, where you become bulletproof, so that you know yourself, you know how to resolve conflicts when you have them, you know how to prevent conflicts before you get them, you know how to resolve conflicts quickly when they occur. Because this is, when you understand GNM, you realize you have to take a completely different approach to prevention, because before I thought prevention was exercise, eat good, keep your stress pretty low, do all of these good things. But, I realize that most people, when it comes to stress, they just say, don't be too stressed. Keep your stress low, which practically for most people means nothing.
Well, and very often what it equates to functionally is when you notice that you are stressed, fight that stress, resist that stress, be stressed about that stress. Basically it invalidates that experience and it gives you one more thing to stress about versus like, what is that experience of stress actually made of? What does the feeling of stress look like in terms of mental behavior, in terms of thought? I mean, how do you know when to be stressed? How precisely do you go about being stressed when you do it? And then by degrees practicing modifying it. It's basically what we teach in the Ever Greater Life course, which in addition to the program that you mentioned, we're coming out with a new option for enrollment in that. I mean, it's a very powerful thing. It's not about being tense. It's about being supple. Supple mentally, supple in terms of your experience. It's this ability to absorb the impacts of life. I mean, the bad thing is not that bad things happen. The bad thing is that when bad things happen, we aren't always able to respond resourcefully to those things. And that's the situation when that's a bad thing. That's an unfortunate thing. That's when so much of the bad feelings or so much of the desperation, so much of the experiences that aren't worth having, they don't come from the bad stuff that happens in our life. They come from the feeling, the experience of being cut off from your ability to respond resourcefully to what's going on in your world. And you tend in that moment to default to emotional resistance and to suffering. And when you learn how to, the more relaxed you are, there's this idea called a mind like water, which is like when a stone kind of is thrown into a body of water, the water never overreacts, the water never underreacts, the water always responds appropriately. And when you're that way too, and this is the thing, and as soon as you have a better thought to think, you think it. As soon as you have something better to do, you do it. As soon as you have a better feeling to feel and you have access to that feeling, you'll feel it. And kind of the consequence of that, or the logical consequence of that, is that if you aren't feeling better than you are, it's because you don't have access to better feelings right now. If you're not doing better, if you're not doing more of the things that will promote health and thriving in your life, it's because you don't have access to those behaviors. If you're not thinking more resourceful thoughts, it's because you don't have access to them. And that's really what the course is about, and that's what the Resolve program is going to be about. It's about giving you access to those things. And what happens for a lot of people is that, okay, here I am, I'm going about my day, and something happens, it hits me up to I go up to my threshold. For most people, they have absolutely nothing to do mentally in response to that. They don't have the flexibility of behavior at the level of mind, the level of thought, to respond resourcefully when they're above their threshold. And so what they do is they go to the default program, which is to emotionally resist, which is to suffer, which is to go into fight or flight, which is to tense down and clamp down and go into survival mode. And the only reason anyone ever does that is because they don't have anything better to do. They don't have access to a better option at that time. What our stuff does is systematically build into your system something called Requisite Variety, which is basically you've got other options. And when you have other options, you've got a wider selection of things to choose from, and you choose consciously from that selection. You choose the things that serve you. So you choose to respond to someone mistreating you, not in the way that anyone else would, not in the way that is reasonable to, or in the way that's justified. You respond in a way that improves the quality of what it's like to be you. You respond in a way that allows you to create more of what you want and less of what you don't moving forward. And that means more of the experiences. It means more of the outcomes. It doesn't mean being a doormat by any means whatsoever. It just means you respond to the reality of stuff, which is to say that you engage with it creatively, you work with it, you look at it all, and you say, okay, given this, what do I want? Now, the experience of doing that is an experience of empowerment. The experience of doing that is an experience of having it together. The experience of doing that is an experience of being in control, being the creative force in your life. Stuff goes on outside. You by degrees, you begin to realize that even when things go wrong out there, they can go right inside, that you can respond resourcefully to that stuff, and that experience of responding resourcefully to shit that happens in your life is a profoundly positive one. Negative things happen, you respond resourcefully to them and create a positive experience. You begin to become more and more empowered with that. You actually relax more and more and more. The more repetitions that you have of responding resourcefully to stuff that goes on. Do you know the voice in your head that goes, well, what if this happens? Well, what if they get mad? Well, what if they say this? Or, well, what if this goes on? Well, pretty soon you start having an answer to that voice, which is to say, well, we'll handle it if it happens. And you have this just confidence and this just knowing. Not like an uptight, like type A, we're going to handle it no matter what happens. It's just kind of like a relaxation, because it's like the best athletes in the world. They're not tense and rigid. They're extremely relaxed. Think about a panther or a lion. They're very lazy. They're just a complete relaxation until they're not, until they shift into that movement mode. And when you kind of learn to engage with your experience, your reality in that way, the more relaxed you become, the more powerful you become, and the more powerful you become, the more you're able to relax because you know you have it under control, and your responses become measured. Your mental responses, your emotional responses, your behavioral responses. There's no over or under reaction. That's what creates crises. You know what I'm saying? That's what creates the stuff that we then resist and suffer over and send all kinds of messages to our body. When you just start responding to things and you've got that flexibility to do it, you become a very powerful person because there's this kind of conscious direction of your power. Instead of funneling it in the direction of emotional resistance and suffering and anxiety and staying up all night and sweating and all this different stuff, you just funnel it to, I'm just going to take it easy until whatever it is that I'm worried about actually happens. And then when that thing happens, I'm going to find out everything I need to know just to respond resourcefully to it.
Yeah, and back to just the concept of nutrition. So what kind of attitude should you take towards nutrition? I do have standards for myself of what I think is ideal, close to the earth, organic, not processed, not a lot of ingredients. But I mean, the biggest thing is, in what state are you eating? What are you moving towards? Good health? Are you moving towards enjoyment? Like, what is the state of mind that you have when you're consuming food? Are you choking down kale because you think it's the right thing to do, because your daughter wants you to, so you can cure your disease? Or are you doing it because I really like the way this tastes, and I find it like I like to layer all of the good things. I like to enjoy what I'm eating. I like for it to be very wholesome and nutritious, and I like it to taste really good, and I like to eat it surrounded by people I love, and I like to chew slowly. I mean, there's so many different elements to it. It's not just here, make sure you choke down these, this juice, that smoothie, because we have to get these nutrients from out here inside here so you can be okay.
So you can go on living having an unpleasant experience of eating things that you hate.
That's kind of the thing, and that's like I feel, I have heard a lot of people say that, like if you couldn't eat the things that you wanted to eat, like why be alive? Because eating it's such a real, like, physical being, human enjoyment. I mean, good food is a wonderful, enriching part of life. And
I think the wisdom there too is not necessarily be sure you eat junk so that you can be happy. The wisdom is in not being willing to sacrifice experience. And I think the thing too is recognizing, you can engineer. Don't settle for one or the other. Don't settle for positive experiences or healthy food. It's like, if it's important enough, if eating, I think it probably is the takeaway message, is that if eating healthy is important enough to do, it's important enough to find a way of eating healthy that improves the quality of what it's like to be you. Do you know what I mean? I think that's really the relevant thing, is that if it really matters that you do this thing, and I think people have a pretty good sense for what's important for them to do in terms of nutrition or anything in their life. It's important. If it's important enough to think about, it's important enough to find a way of thinking about it that feels good to you, feels positive to you in some sense. And I think it's true for food too. And so you're allowed to eat any kind of healthy stuff you want, as long as you find a way of creating an experience of doing that is a net positive one. Yeah,
and I do just think it's so important just to remember. I mean, we do have to unlearn a lot of these things, like, oh, that food causes cancer. Oh, that food, these things cause cancer. Is saying that cancer is a bad thing. This is a bad food. This is a bad substance. This bad substance causes this bad thing to happen inside of your body. And that's kind of one of the primary shifts to make when you're understanding GNM. It's that, cancer is not the result of you doing bad things. Cancer is not a punishment for bad living. Cancer is not a punishment for smoking, for unhealthy lifestyle. It's a response. It is a measured, specific adaptation response to conflict shocks you've experienced in your life, whether during the conflict active phase or during the healing phase. And that is so important when it comes to, what do I do now? You know what I mean? Like, you've got to get that basic premise of GNM in order to, ease your fear, especially if you have a diagnosis, and then move forward with that wisdom and make good choices for you, and make it from a place of understanding and knowledge, and not fear, and not moving away from all of this bad stuff so you can prevent bad things from happening. It really is. It's about increased understanding, increased knowledge, and doing it from a place of feeling good. Good stuff. Anything else for tonight? All good. Well, thank you guys so very much for joining us, and we will be back again very soon. Have a good night.